What would you do if your neighbor decided they had more right to your property than you did? When I bought my dream house, I never imagined I'd be fighting for my own garage. It was supposed to be perfect, a quiet suburban neighborhood, friendly neighbors, and, best of all, a 3-car garage that had been converted into a fully equipped workshop. That garage was what sold me on the place. I restore classic cars as a hobby, and the previous owner had built it into a mechanic's paradise: workbenches, tool racks, a high-end ventilation system, and even reinforced flooring for heavy-duty work. It was everything I'd ever wanted. For the first few months, things were great. Every weekend, I spent my time working on my latest project, a 1967 Mustang in desperate need of a rebuild. I kept to myself but always waved to the neighbors, trying to be polite. That's how I first met Karen, the woman next door. At first, she seemed pleasant enough, just another suburban mom who smiled and made small talk when we crossed paths. She even complimented my Mustang a few times, mentioning how cool it was to have a mechanic in the neighborhood. But then things got weird. Not long after her teenage son, Tyler, got his driver's license, Karen suddenly took a very special interest in my garage. At first, it was little comments, things like, "Wow, that's a lot of space for just one person," or "Must be nice having all that extra room." I thought nothing of it, just casual chit-chat. Then, one Saturday morning, she caught me as I was heading out for coffee. "Hey, I was wondering, would you mind if we used your garage sometimes?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Tyler just got his first car, and our garage is completely full. It would be such a lifesaver if he could park in yours." I blinked, caught completely off guard. Was she serious? Sorry, but I actually use it for my restoration work. I need the space for my tools and projects, I said, trying to be polite. Her friendly smile vanished instantly. "Well, that's pretty selfish," she snapped. "You don't need all that space just for your little hobby. My son actually needs it." I almost laughed, thinking she had to be joking. But the glare in her eyes told me otherwise. I stood my ground. "It's not just a hobby. I've put a lot into my workshop. I'm not comfortable letting other people use it." Karen huffed and stormed off, but I figured that was the end of it. I was so wrong. Over the next few days, I noticed something strange. Karen, who had always just given me a passing nod before, now made a point of watching me whenever I was in my driveway. I'd glance up from my work and catch her standing at her window, arms crossed, glaring. Other times, she'd be outside watering her plants, except she wasn't watering anything, just standing there with a hose, pretending to be busy while gossiping with neighbors and casting glances my way. Then the rumors started. I ran into one of my neighbors, Linda, a sweet retired woman from down the street. She hesitated before speaking, then asked, "Hey, is it true you're refusing to share your garage with Karen's son? She mentioned you had all that space and weren't willing to help out." I clenched my jaw. So Karen was actively turning the neighborhood against me. "It's my garage," I said, forcing a calm tone. "I use it for my work. It's not just sitting there empty." Linda gave me a knowing look. "Yeah, I figured. Karen has a reputation." I should have asked more, but at that moment, my phone rang. It was the HOA. A formal complaint had been filed against me. According to the HOA representative, Karen claimed I was misusing neighborhood resources by keeping my garage to myself. She argued that it should be accessible for community use since I wasn't using every inch of it at all times. I almost laughed. This is a private garage. I own it. It's not a public amenity. The HOA rep sighed, almost like they didn't want to be involved. "Well, there's a petition circulating to discuss shared usage of large private garages for neighborhood benefit. We have to look into it." I hung up, furious. Not only had Karen lied to my neighbors, but now she was trying to use the HOA to force me into compliance. And she wasn't done. That same week, I walked outside to find Tyler, her son, standing on his tiptoes, trying to peer through my garage windows. I stepped outside and cleared my throat. He jumped, looking guilty, then shrugged. "My mom said I could check it out," he said, like that was supposed to justify trespassing. I crossed my arms. Well, she was wrong. "Stay off my property." He huffed and stormed back into his house. Not even an hour later, I got a text from Karen. "Karen asterisk, you're being ridiculous. It's just a garage. You can't even be neighborly for 5 seconds?" I ignored it, but the messages kept coming. "Karen asterisk, you don't deserve that garage if you're going to be such a jerk about it. Karen asterisk, this is why no one likes you here. Karen asterisk, selfish men like you ruin good communities." I blocked her number, but that didn't stop her. At 5:07 a.m. the next morning, my phone buzzed loudly on my nightstand. Half asleep, I picked it up. It was Karen. Before I could even say anything, she barked, "I need your garage keys." I sat up. "What?" "My son has an early practice, and it's supposed to rain. His car cannot get wet. Just give me your keys, and I'll make sure he's careful." I let out a breath, trying to process the audacity. "It's 5 in the morning. I'm not giving you my keys. Don't call me again." She screeched into the phone, "You don't understand. His car is brand new, it's unfair for it to be outside when you have all that space sitting there." I hung up. Karen called 6 more times, then came the text messages. 20 of them, they started as demands, then turned into pleas, then threats. And then, as I was heading out the door to work, I found Karen standing in my driveway, blocking my car. "You can't just ignore me," she snapped, arms crossed. "This is a neighborhood issue, everyone agrees you're being unreasonable." I was already running late. "Move. Now. Go ahead, call the cops," she sneered. "I'll tell them how you're harassing us by hoarding garage space." So I pulled out my phone and started dialing. Karen's smug smile faltered, but she held her ground, until I started describing her to the 911 operator. Then she practically ran back to her house. I should have known she wasn't going to stop there. When I came home that evening, Tyler's car was parked right in front of my garage door, blocking it completely. Karen marched over before I even had a chance to process the audacity. "Since you won't share the garage," she said, grinning, "we'll just have to use your driveway." I took a deep breath, snapped a few pictures of the blatant trespassing, and called the non-emergency police line. "Yes, I'd like to report a vehicle blocking access to my property," I said calmly. "The owner refuses to move it." Karen's grin disappeared. "You're making a huge mistake," she spat. "My husband's cousin is a lawyer, and he says we have every right to park here." I ignored her, finishing my report with the dispatcher. Within 20 minutes, a patrol car pulled up. The responding officer, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s listened to both sides before shaking her head. "Ma'am, this is private property," she told Karen firmly. "If you don't move the vehicle immediately, it will be towed at your expense." Karen's face turned red, but his garage is empty most of the time. "He's just being spiteful." "That's irrelevant," the officer said flatly. "Move the car. Now." After some grumbling, Tyler finally came outside and moved his car, but not before Karen made a big show of checking for scratches and declaring, "If I find any damage, I'll sue you." The officer, clearly done with her nonsense, turned to me before leaving. "You might want to invest in security cameras, people like this tend to escalate." It was good advice. I installed a full security system the next day. Motion sensors. Night vision cameras. An alarm system ***. For a few days, things were quiet. Too quiet. I should have known Karen was plotting something worse. The uneasy peace didn't last long. For a few days after the police forced Karen and Tyler to move the car, things seemed almost normal. Karen wasn't loitering in the driveway, Tyler wasn't creeping around my garage, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, they'd finally given up. I should have known better. It started with more whispers from the neighbors. People I barely spoke to suddenly started acting distant, avoiding eye contact when I passed by. I overheard fragments of conversation. "Can you believe how petty he's being?" and "he scratched his own car for attention." At first, I brushed it off. I had no idea what they were talking about. But then, one morning, I stepped outside and felt my stomach drop. A long, jagged scratch ran across the driver's side of my Mustang. Not just any scratch, a deep gouge, dug into the paint like someone had pressed down hard, dragging something sharp along the body. And just to make sure there was no mistaking the message, someone had carved words into the metal. Selfish PR*CK. For a moment, I just stared, gripping my coffee mug so hard I thought it might crack. Then, without hesitation, I checked my phone and pulled up my security footage. I already knew who did it. I just needed proof. And there it was, 2:34 a.m. Tyler, hood up, creeping toward my car with something sharp in his hand. He hesitated for a second before leaning in and dragging it across the side. He even took a step back to admire his handiwork. I clenched my jaw. Karen had escalated. Again. By noon, I was knocking on her door. When she opened it, she had that same smug look on her face, the one she always wore when she thought she had won. I didn't bother with small talk. I held up my phone, playing the footage. "Your son did this. He vandalized my car." She barely glanced at the screen before rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. That's clearly edited," she scoffed. "You've been obsessed with us for weeks. Wouldn't surprise me if you did it yourself just to frame him." I let out a sharp laugh, incredulous. "Are you serious? This is clear video proof. You're really going to pretend that's not Tyler?" She crossed her arms, unbothered. "And? Prove it in court." So I did. I filed a police report that afternoon. Within a day, an officer was at her doorstep, handing her a summons. I sued her for damages. And here's where it got even worse, she fought it. She denied everything, refused to pay, and even had the audacity to claim that I had bullied her son into vandalizing my car. For months, she dragged out the case, filing appeal after appeal, wasting everyone's time. The judge was done with her antics by the second hearing, ordering her to pay in full plus legal fees. She still delayed the payments for as long as she could, but it didn't matter. She wasn't getting away with it. And I wasn't about to let my guard down. I doubled my security, biometric locks, reinforced garage doors, motion sensors inside and out. Karen had tried everything to get into my garage. And I had a sinking feeling she wasn't done. I should have known that Karen wasn't the type to take a loss gracefully. After the vandalism case didn't go her way, she seemed to disappear for a bit. No more smug glares, no more snide comments. Even Tyler had stopped skulking around. The silence should have been a relief. Instead, it put me on edge. Karen never backed down. She just regrouped. And sure enough, a week later, my security system saved me from something much worse. It was a little after midnight when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from my garage cameras. I rubbed my eyes and pulled up the live feed, half expecting it to be a stray cat or a raccoon. Instead, I saw Tyler crouched at my garage door, a flashlight between his teeth, fiddling with the lock. I bolted upright. Then, the camera panned just enough to catch Karen standing at the end of the driveway, arms crossed, looking both impatient and paranoid. They weren't just messing around this time. They were actually trying to break in. I didn't hesitate. I dialed 911. "Yeah, I need officers dispatched immediately," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the adrenaline rushing through me. My security cameras just caught my neighbor and her son attempting to break into my garage. "Yes, they're still there." The dispatcher told me to stay put, but I wasn't about to sit and wait. I watched the screen as Tyler struggled with the lock, pausing every few seconds to whisper something to his mother. Karen wasn't just letting him do this, she was coaching him. A few minutes later, flashing red and blue lights flooded my driveway. Karen barely had time to react before 3 patrol cars surrounded my property. Tyler froze. He turned toward his mom, panic written all over his face. But Karen? She actually had the nerve to start screaming at the officers like they were the problem. "This is harassment. I have every right to be here," she shrieked as they placed her in handcuffs. "This is a misunderstanding. My son was just looking. That garage should be for the neighborhood." One of the officers ignored her, turning to me. "You got footage of this?" I nodded, already pulling up the video. He watched for about 10 seconds before shaking his head. "Yeah, that's enough for an arrest. We've got attempted breaking and entering, criminal trespassing, and possession of burglary tools." But Karen wasn't done. As they cuffed Tyler, she lost her mind. "You can't do this. He's just a kid," she screamed, thrashing as the officers loaded her into the squad car. "He wouldn't even be doing this if that selfish bastard had just let us use the damn garage." One of the officers shut the door in her face before turning to me. "You might want to hear this," he said, holding up Karen's phone. Apparently, during the arrest, they found text messages from Karen to someone about selling my tools. She had already lined up a buyer. They weren't just trying to get in for Tyler to park his car, they were planning to steal my equipment. That meant her charges just got upgraded to attempted burglary with intent to sell stolen goods. Tyler was in deep trouble, too. Since he was still a minor, he'd be sent to juvenile detention, but Karen? She was looking at serious time. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt relief. She wasn't just entitled, she was dangerous. And finally, she was out of my life. Karen's arrest should have been the end of it, but her legacy of entitlement and chaos still had a few final twists left. After she and Tyler were taken away, the neighborhood slowly began to recover from the madness she had inflicted on it. But before we could all fully breathe easy, I learned something that made my blood boil. Her husband, Greg, the guy who had conveniently been clueless about her behavior, wasn't so innocent after all. A neighbor let it slip that Greg had known exactly what kind of person Karen was, he just never stepped in to stop her. She had pulled similar stunts in their last 3 neighborhoods, harassing people into giving her whatever she wanted until they either gave in or moved away. Greg, apparently, had just let it happen. When I confronted him about it, he had the audacity to say, "I thought she was just being pushy. I didn't think she'd get arrested." But Greg wanted nothing to do with the mess she left behind. He filed for divorce within the month, put their house up for sale, and disappeared. Before he left, in what I assume was some kind of guilt-driven peace offering, he even helped me install extra lighting in my garage, a final apology for his wife's insanity. Karen, meanwhile, wasn't adjusting well to life behind bars. I heard through the grapevine that she tried to pull the same entitled behavior in jail, demanding a bottom bunk because she needed it more. Her cellmate wasn't as patient as I was, and she got transferred to another facility for her own safety. Then came the final insult: Karen tried to sue me from jail. She somehow found a shady lawyer and filed a lawsuit for emotional distress and defamation, claiming that my refusal to share the garage had led to her wrongful imprisonment. The case went nowhere, but the fact that she even tried told me one thing: she still hadn't learned her lesson. As if that wasn't enough, her sister, Debbie, tried to move into the neighborhood. The HOA, which had once entertained Karen's ridiculous demands, had finally wised up. They dug into Debbie's background and found out she had pulled similar harassment tactics elsewhere. Her application was denied immediately. Without Karen, the neighborhood finally started to feel like a community again. People were friendlier, more relaxed. My garage, once the battleground for Karen's entitlement, became a place where neighbors came together. A few of them even started getting into car restoration, and we made a habit of hanging out on weekends, swapping stories and working on our projects. The best part? Karen's house was sold to a retired mechanic, Frank, and his wife, Linda. Frank converted the garage into his own workshop, and we became fast friends, helping each other with projects and trading tools. That's what real neighbors do. A few weeks ago, I got one final letter from Karen. She wanted me to write to the parole board, saying I'd overreacted and that the charges should be dropped. She even had the nerve to say that, when she got out, I should finally let Tyler use my garage to prove I'd learned to share. I didn't even bother responding. I forwarded the letter straight to her probation officer. The irony in all of this? The prison doesn't have a garage. And for the first time in years, Karen is in a place where she truly has no power over anyone. What's the most entitled thing a neighbor has ever done to you? Drop your horror stories below. I'd love to hear how bad it can really get.